She was not supposed to be there. Sofia had driven 4 hours just to have dinner with her cousin. A birthday. Something simple, something normal. She walked through the wrong door, 1 block too far down the street, and stepped into a restaurant so quiet and so beautiful that she thought she had made a mistake. She had. Every table was full of men in dark suits. No women, no children, no laughter, just the soft sound of forks on china, and the low hum of conversations nobody was meant to hear. She turned to leave, and walked straight into a wall. Except it was not a wall. It was a man. Tall, dark, tattooed from his wrists to his neck, with eyes so cold she felt it in her chest, like a door slamming shut. The whole restaurant stopped. Forks went down. Chairs scraped back. 6 men reached inside their jackets at the exact same moment. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. And then, very slowly, he leaned down close to her ear, and he whispered just one word, her name, and every last drop of color drained from her face. Before we begin, drop a comment below telling us, do you think a dangerous man can ever truly change for the right person? We read every single one. Now, let's get into the story. Sofia had not planned to be in New York that weekend. She had planned to stay home, finish a batch of honey almond croissants for the Saturday morning rush, and go to bed early, like the 34-year-old woman she was. But her cousin Elena had turned 40, and Elena had cried on the phone, and Sofia had never in her life been able to say no to someone crying. So she packed a small bag, locked up her little bakery on Maple Street, and drove 4 hours in a car that smelled like vanilla extract and old coffee. She was tired. She was happy. She had absolutely no idea that her life was about to end and begin at the exact same moment. The restaurant Elena had chosen was on West 54th Street, a narrow door between 2 glass buildings, with no sign outside, and no menu in the window. Sofia walked 1 block too far, turned around, and stepped through the first heavy door she found. The warmth hit her first, then the silence. It was the kind of silence that does not happen by accident, the kind that falls over a room when every single person in it is paying very close attention to something. White tablecloths, low golden light, men in dark suits at every table. No women, no children, not one smile anywhere in the room. Sofia stood in the doorway for exactly 3 seconds before she understood, in the wordless animal way that the body understands danger before the mind does, that she had made a very serious mistake. She turned to leave and walked straight into a wall. Except it was not a wall. It was a man, tall and broad, and completely immovable, dressed in a black shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow, tattoos running from his wrists all the way up to the base of his neck. Her shoulder hit his chest. Her handbag swung forward. The glass of red wine in his hand tilted and emptied itself slowly and completely down the front of his white undershirt. The whole restaurant went still. Not quiet. It was already quiet, still, like a photograph. Like everyone in the room had forgotten how to breathe at exactly the same moment. Sofia looked up. She would remember this moment for the rest of her life. Not the guns that appeared from inside jackets a half-second later. Not the sound of 6 chairs pushing back across marble floor. Not the low, dangerous murmur that moved through the room like a current. She would remember his eyes, dark, completely calm, watching her the way a man watches something he has been waiting a long time to see. He was beautiful in the way that certain dangerous things are beautiful, the way a storm looks from behind glass. You can admire it, you just cannot touch it. She opened her mouth to apologize. Before a single word came out, he tilted his head, barely an inch, and something shifted in his face. Not softened, shifted, like a door opening in a wall you did not know had a door. He handed his empty glass to the man beside him without looking away from her face. Then, in a voice so quiet she felt it more than heard it, he leaned down close enough that she could smell expensive cologne and something darker underneath it, and he whispered just one word. Her name, not a question, not a guess. Her full name, the one only people who truly knew her used, spoken with the quiet certainty of a man who had known it for a very long time, and every last drop of color drained from her face. She did not scream. She did not run. She stood completely still, her heart slamming against her ribs. and looked up at a man she had never seen before in her life. A man who was looking back at her, like she was the only person in the room, in the building, in the city, and she thought very clearly, he knows my name, and I do not know his, and there are 6 guns pointed in my direction, and I have flour on my jacket. That was the thought. That was what her mind chose to do with the situation. The man, whoever he was, glanced at the flour on her jacket too, and for one fraction of 1 second, something moved across his face that was almost a smile. He pulled out the chair beside him and looked at her. "Sit down," he said. 2 words, no raised voice, no threat in it at all, which somehow made it worse, because a man who does not need to threaten you is a man who has never needed to. Sofia sat down. She told herself it was because she had no choice. She would spend a long time lying to herself about that. He settled back into his own chair, straightened the cuff of his ruined shirt, and picked up a fresh glass of wine, like nothing unusual had happened. Like women walked into his world every day, and simply stayed. What she did not know yet, what she could not possibly have known sitting in that chair with her hands folded tight in her lap and her heart still running, was that the man beside her had known her name for 3 years, and the reason he knew it had nothing to do with chance, and everything to do with her father. His name was Marco Vitale. She found that out not because he told her, but because she heard one of his men say it in a low, careful voice while refilling his water glass, the way you say the name of someone you are genuinely afraid of. Marco Vitale. She had never heard it before in her life, but the way every single person in that restaurant moved around him, never too close, never too far, always watching, told her everything she needed to know about who he was before he said another word. He was not just powerful. He was the kind of powerful that does not need a title, because everyone in the room already knows. She sat beside him for 40 minutes. He did not explain why she was still there. He did not threaten her. He simply ate his dinner, with the calm of a man who had already decided how the evening would end, and occasionally glanced at her with those dark, unreadable eyes, in a way that made her feel like she was a problem he was very much looking forward to solving. When the restaurant emptied, and the last of his men stepped outside, Marco set down his fork, folded his napkin with slow, deliberate hands, and looked at her directly for the first time since she had sat down. Not a glance this time. A full, unhurried look, the kind that takes inventory. She felt it move across her face, her shoulders, her hands folded tight in her lap. She was a full-figured woman, and she had spent enough of her life around people who made her feel like that was something to apologize for. Marco Vitale did not look at her like that. He looked at her the way you look at something rare, something you did not expect to find. It lasted only a few seconds, and then it was gone, replaced by that cool, unreadable expression, and she almost convinced herself she had imagined it. Almost. "Your father's name was Daniel Russo," Marco said. His voice was completely even. No anger in it. No cruelty. Just fact, laid down like stone. "He worked for me for 11 years. He was one of 3 people in the world I trusted completely." He paused. 3 years ago, he disappeared. He took something with him that did not belong to him. Something that cost me a great deal, not in money, but in damage that money cannot fix. Sofia opened her mouth. He continued before she could speak. "I have been looking for him since. Last year I found out he had died. 6 months ago, I found out he had a daughter." He looked at her. "You." The word landed in the center of her chest like something dropped from a height. She wanted to tell him he was wrong. She wanted to stand up and walk out and get in her car and drive back to her bakery, and her croissants, and her small, quiet, normal life. She wanted all of that very badly, but she sat completely still. Because the thing about hearing something that cannot be true is that some part of you, some quiet, knowing part that has always been there, does not find it surprising at all. Her father had been a gentle man, soft-spoken. He smelled like coffee and old books. He called her every Sunday without fail, and always asked about the bakery before he asked about anything else. He had also, she realized now, never once talked about his work. 11 years of Sunday phone calls, and she could not have told you what her father did for a living. She had never thought to ask. She thought about that now, and felt something cold and quiet settle in her stomach. The tears came without warning. Not loud ones. Sofia was not a loud crier, just a slow, steady blur at the edges of her vision that she blinked against hard and refused to let fall, pressing her lips together in the way her mother had taught her when she was 7 years old, and her mother had said, "You are allowed to feel it, but you do not have to show the world every time you do." Marco watched her do this. She saw something move across his face, brief and quickly controlled, like a light turned on and off in a distant window. He reached across the table and poured her a glass of water. He did not say anything. He did not tell her it would be okay. She was grateful for that. She had always hated being told things would be okay by people who had no way of knowing. He told her she could not go back to her hotel that night. He said it plainly, without dressing it up. There were people who knew who she was now. People who believed, correctly or not, that her father had left something with her before he died. She was not safe alone. He had a penthouse 2 blocks away, with a security detail that had never once failed. She would stay there. It was not a question, and it was not quite an order. It was just a fact he was presenting to her. The way you present a weather forecast. This is what is happening. Here is what you do about it. Sofia looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up her handbag, pushed back her chair, and said, "I need my overnight bag from the car." Marco was quiet for exactly 1 second. Then he signaled to one of his men by the door. She noticed, though she did not say anything, that the corner of his mouth moved, just slightly, just for a moment. That night she could not sleep. The penthouse was enormous and silent and smelled like expensive wood and leather and absolutely nothing warm. At 2 in the morning she gave up, got out of bed, and went to find the kitchen. It took her a while. The kitchen was the size of her entire apartment back home. She found flour in the 3rd cabinet, butter in the refrigerator, and a mixing bowl under the counter. And she stood in the middle of that cold, beautiful kitchen in her socks and her pajamas, and she baked. Because baking was the only thing that had ever made the world feel manageable. Because her father had taught her. Because standing still was no longer something she was able to do. She did not hear him come in. She turned around to reach for the salt, and he was standing in the doorway in a dark shirt and bare feet, watching her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Something unguarded and quiet and almost painfully human. She froze. He did not move. The whole kitchen smelled like warm bread, and something about that, the warmth of it, the ordinariness of it in the middle of all this, made him take 1 slow step forward, then another. He stopped in front of her, reached out, touched her face with one hand, gently, just his thumb brushing her cheek, taking away a streak of flour she had not known was there. His hand stayed. 1 second, 2. She looked up at him and did not look away, and he kissed her, slow and quiet, like a question he had been carrying all evening and had finally, despite everything, decided to ask. Then he stepped back, said nothing, and walked out of the kitchen without a single word, leaving her standing alone in the warm light, with her heart in her throat, and the bread going slightly golden in the oven. She stood there for a long time after he left, her fingers pressed to her lips, the smell of warm bread all around her. And she thought, a man like that does not kiss a woman like that unless she means something. And then, immediately after, a man like that does not let something mean too much to him for very long before he does something about it. She was not sure yet which one of those thoughts frightened her more. The morning after the kitchen, Marco was gone before she woke up. No note, no explanation, just a black coffee on the counter still warm enough that he could not have left long ago, and a suited man named Enzo standing by the front door, who told her, politely and very firmly, that she was not to leave the penthouse today. Sofia drank the coffee standing at the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city, and told herself that what happened last night was nothing. A tired man in a weak moment, a woman who was frightened and far from home, and read too much into a kiss that probably meant considerably less to him than it did to her. She was very convincing. She almost believed it completely. Then she remembered the way he had looked at her in that doorway. Bare feet, dark eyes, the whole careful wall of him coming down just slightly, and she stopped convincing herself and just drank her coffee in silence. He came back in the early afternoon. He did not mention the kitchen. She did not mention the kitchen. They sat across from each other at the long dining table, while his second in command, a quiet, serious man named Caruso, briefed him on something in a low voice that Sofia was clearly not meant to hear. She focused on the view and tried to look like a woman who was not listening. She was absolutely listening. What she heard made the coffee she was still holding go cold in her hands. Someone knew she was here. Not just that she existed. They had known that already. Someone knew she was in this building, on this floor, in this specific apartment. And they were not, from the sound of it, people who had come to talk. Marco looked at her the moment Caruso finished. Not with panic, and she was beginning to understand that panic was simply not something his face did. He looked at her with that measured, calculating calm and said, "We are moving you." Sofia set down her cup. Where? It was not a question so much as a demand, and she could see from the slight shift in his expression that he noticed the difference. "Somewhere safer," he said. "Somewhere that is not here." She stood up. "I am not a package, Marco. You cannot just keep moving me from place to place without telling me what is happening." He looked at her for a moment. Really looked. The way he had in the restaurant, taking inventory, and then said, very quietly, "3 men came to this building last night while you were sleeping. So yes, I can." He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair and walked toward the door. "You have 10 minutes. The safe house was a townhouse in a quiet street in Brooklyn, narrow and red-bricked and completely ordinary looking from the outside. Inside it was clean and warm and had clearly been prepared quickly. Fresh sheets on the bed, groceries in the kitchen, 3 of Marco's men in the rooms downstairs. Marco walked through the space checking windows and sightlines with the focused efficiency of a man who had done this many times before. Sofia stood in the middle of the small living room with her overnight bag and watched him, and felt something she did not entirely want to feel. A deep, inconvenient gratitude, and underneath it, something warmer and more complicated that she was not ready to name yet. He turned and found her watching him. Neither of them said anything. The silence between them had changed since the kitchen. It was no longer uncomfortable. That, she thought, was its own kind of dangerous. He stayed longer than he needed to. She knew that because Caruso called twice, and Marco stepped into the hallway both times, and came back both times without leaving. At some point she made tea because it was something to do with her hands, and she brought him a cup without asking if he wanted one, and he took it without thanking her. And they sat in the small kitchen in the late afternoon light, and did not talk about what was happening outside these walls, or what had happened in the kitchen last night, or the strange, impossible fact that 4 days ago she had been frosting birthday cakes on Maple Street, and now she was here. They talked about small things. She told him her father had taught her to bake. He went very still when she said that. Not tense, just still, the way a person goes still when something unexpected touches a place they keep protected. He did not say anything, but he did not look away either. It was later that evening, getting ready for bed, that she found it. She had been wearing the same jacket for 3 days, and finally turned it inside out to check the lining before hanging it up. Her fingers caught on something stiff and flat, sewn into the inner seam, something that had always been there, that she had never noticed because she had never thought to look. She worked it loose carefully. A small envelope, cream-colored, sealed, with her name on the front in her father's handwriting. Her name, the same way Marco had said it that first night, like it meant something specific, something weighted, something chosen. Her hands were completely steady as she opened it. Her heart was not. She read it once. Then she sat on the edge of the bed and read it again slowly, the envelope soft in her fingers, her father's voice moving through every word, as clearly as if he were sitting in the room beside her. When she finished, she sat in the silence for a long time. The letter did not explain everything. It did not need to. It explained the one thing that changed the shape of every other thing. The reason her father had really disappeared. The reason he had taken what he took. And the name of the person inside Marco's organization who had made it necessary. She stood up, put on her shoes, walked to the door of the room. She did not go to Caruso. She did not go to any of the 3 men downstairs. She went to Marco. Not because she had no choice. Not because she was frightened, but because somewhere in the last 4 days, Without her permission, and without any warning at all, he had become the person she trusted most in the world. And the letter in her hand was either going to fix everything between them or destroy it completely. Marco was sitting alone at the kitchen table when she found him. No jacket, no phone, just a glass of something amber he had not touched, and that particular quality of stillness he carried, that was never emptiness, always thought, always calculation, always something turning slowly behind those dark eyes. He looked up when she came in. She held out the letter without saying anything. He looked at it for a moment, at her handwriting on the front, at the way her hand was not shaking, even though everything else about her in that moment said that it should be, and he took it. She sat down across from him and watched his face while he read. It was the most honest she had ever seen him. Every word moved through him visibly, quietly, like weather crossing open ground. His jaw tightened at one point. At another, his eyes stopped moving for a few seconds, and he simply sat with whatever the sentence had given him. When he finished, he set the letter down flat on the table and looked at it for a long time without speaking. He knew, Marco said finally. His voice was low and completely even, but there was something underneath it, something old and heavy that had been carried a long time. He found out 3 months before he disappeared. Someone inside my own organization had arranged to have me killed. A man I had known for 20 years. Your father discovered it and took the evidence before it could be destroyed. He ran because he did not know who else inside the family he could trust. He was trying to find a way to get it to me safely. He stopped. His hand rested flat on the letter. He died before he could. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that falls after something true has been said out loud for the very first time, and the room is still adjusting to the weight of it. Sofia looked at the man across from her. This hard, dangerous, carefully controlled man who had spent 3 years believing her father was a thief, and watched him reckon with the fact that he had been wrong. Not just wrong, completely, entirely wrong, about a person who had died trying to protect him. She had expected anger. She had expected him to redirect it somewhere. The way powerful people often do when they discover their certainty was misplaced. Instead, he was quiet, still, and in that stillness, she saw something she had not expected to see on Marco Vitale's face. Grief, clean and private and real. She reached across the table and put her hand over his without thinking about it. He looked down at her hand, then up at her. He did not pull away. It was over within 24 hours. Marco made 2 phone calls. She did not hear what was said, but she saw the faces of the men in the house afterward. That particular look of people who have just received news they knew was coming, and are relieved and frightened in equal measure that it finally has. The name in her father's letter was dealt with. The men who had come to the building were dealt with. The danger that had rearranged her entire life in the space of 5 days folded quietly and completely, the way danger does when the person dismantling it has spent 30 years learning exactly how. By the following morning, the threat was gone. Sofia was free. She could go home, back to Maple Street, back to her bakery, and her croissants, and her small, warm, ordinary life that was still there waiting for her exactly as she had left it. She packed her bag slowly. She did not examine why it was slow. She folded everything carefully and set her father's letter on top and closed the zip and sat on the edge of the bed for a while looking at the wall. Then she stood up, picked up the bag, and walked out to the hallway. Marco was there, standing by the elevator with his hands in his pockets, watching her come toward him with that expression she had spent 5 days learning to read, the one that looked like nothing from a distance and was everything up close. She stopped in front of him. "Thank you," she said, "for keeping me safe." He nodded once. She shifted the bag on her shoulder, pressed the elevator button. The doors opened immediately. She stepped inside and turned around and looked at him standing there in the hallway. Jacket on, perfectly composed, the whole careful architecture of him back in place. And she thought, he is going to let me go. He is going to stand there and watch the doors close, and that will be the end of it. And she was surprised, standing in that elevator, by exactly how much that cost her. "You never asked me to stay," she said. The words came out quietly, not an accusation, Just a fact she needed to say out loud before the doors closed, and she lost the chance forever. The elevator held. Marco looked at her for a long moment, the longest she had ever seen him be still, and he was a man who was very good at being still. Then he moved, slow and deliberate, the way he did everything, crossing the hallway in 4 steps, and reaching out and stopping the doors with one hand. He looked at her, all the way looked at her, her face, her eyes, the bag on her shoulder, the letter folded inside it. The woman who had walked into his world through the wrong door, and turned out to be the only person in it, who had never once tried to be anything other than exactly what she was. Stay. The word came out low and rough, like it had been a long time getting there, like it had fought its way through 30 years of not asking anyone for anything to reach the surface. Not an order. She had heard him give orders. They sounded nothing like this. This was something else entirely, something that cost him. She could hear it. She let go of her bag. It dropped to the floor of the elevator with a soft thud, and she stepped forward, and he pulled her close in one motion, one arm around her, his other hand cupping her face, tilting it up, and he kissed her the way she had needed him to since the kitchen. Slow and deep and certain. No questions this time, just an answer. She felt it move through her from her chest down to her feet, and she held onto the front of his jacket with both hands and kissed him back with everything the last 5 days had built in her. The fear and the grief and the gratitude and that warm, stubborn, inconvenient thing that had been growing since the moment he handed her a glass of water and did not tell her everything was going to be okay. When they finally pulled apart, he kept his forehead resting against hers, both of them breathing. Outside, the city moved and hummed and went on being itself, entirely indifferent. Inside the hallway of a Brooklyn townhouse, a dangerous man held a warm, soft, extraordinary woman and said nothing at all. He did not need to. Some things do not need words once they have already been said with everything else. She never did make it back to the bakery that weekend. She called her cousin Elena and told her she was fine and would explain later. And Elena, who had known Sofia her entire life, said simply, "You sound different." Sofia looked at Marco across the kitchen, where he was standing in bare feet again, reading her father's letter one more time, with the careful attention of a man making a private promise to someone who was no longer there to receive it. "I am," she said, and she meant it in every possible way. The bakery on Maple Street was still there. Her life was still there. It would be waiting when she was ready. But she was not ready yet. And for the first time in a very long time, not being ready felt less like falling, and more like standing at the edge of something good, looking out, taking a breath, and choosing to stay. If this story found you today, if something in Sofia's journey felt familiar, if you have ever walked through the wrong door and ended up exactly where you were supposed to be, then this channel was made for you. We tell stories about ordinary people who turn out to be extraordinary, about love that arrives without asking permission,